It's years ago now, but I still remember it. On the 12th of August 2006, I was reading the morning newspaper and came across one of the 20th century's most remarkable people that I'd never heard of. It was already too late to meet him, because I was reading the obituary of George Chapman, who had died 3 days earlier, aged 85. Born in Liverpool in 1921, George was orphaned as a kid, so he was brought up by his grandparents. He left school at 14 without much of an education and tried various jobs, including being a docker and a boxer, and then World War II began and he joined up. I won't go into his military record, but when he was demobbed, he chose to join the Aylesbury Fire Brigade. I thank Buckinghamshire Fire Authority for this photograph showing Aylesbury Borough Fire Station as it would have been when George worked there. His life had never been a bed of roses. In 1944 he'd married Margaret, but grief soon crossed their lives as their first child, Vivian, died aged only 4 weeks old. So George was confronted by the question we all face: is death the final end? Being a fireman involves long hours waiting for the next emergency, so George and his mates had time to kill, and they filled their time sitting at a table with an upturned glass and the alphabet, similar to a Ouija board. And George was absolutely astounded by some of the answers he got. He learned, for example, that his daughter Vivian was alive on the other side and was being looked after by his dead mother. So he decided to look further into this mystery, and soon he found he could enter a trance and give messages to his fellow firemen from so-called spirit entities. The most important of these was Dr. William Lang, who said through George that together they would heal the sick and provide evidence that we live on after death. It took some time before George was able to track down whether or not Dr. Lang had ever really lived, and Dr. Lang told them where to look. The British Medical Association confirmed that an ophthalmic surgeon of the name William Lang had worked between 1880 and 1914 at London's Middlesex Hospital, later known as Moorfields Eye Hospital. Founded in 1804, Moorfields is one of the oldest and largest centres in the world for teaching and research in this field. In 1874, Dr. Lang qualified as a member and then became a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons. And when he died in 1937, George was still just 16 years old. They never knew each other, one in Liverpool and the other in London. When poorly educated George, with his Liverpudlian accent, became entranced, the cultured voice of Dr. Lang took over, with its wide medical experience and an extensive vocabulary unknown to George. If you had a consultation with George Chapman, it was most likely Dr. Lang that you met rather than George himself. He would be completely out of it, in trance. Dr. Lang explained that in addition to the physical body, we also have a spirit body, and he could partially raise this out of the physical body to operate on it. When he did this, the benefits were then transferred to the physical body. Not that he performed instant miracles, only ever offering to do his best. And in serious cases, Lang may require patients' attendance for months before improvements were achieved. Nonetheless, he often succeeded where orthodox medicine did not. And these successes became so well known that eventually George found himself working full-time with Dr. Lang in clinics in Paris, Lausanne and New York, as well as in England. George realized that when folk could travel across the world to see him, as they did, these people had to be comfortably off. So by going abroad himself, he was able to give the less well-off a chance to receive healing too. Look at this book. It provides one of the first examples of George's success. It was written by a dental surgeon, Mr. Myron, whose wife had perforated the roof of her mouth, and Myron knew no surgical procedure that could cure her problem. but Lang's treatment caused the wound to heal over. In Mr. Myron's view, this was such a miracle that he wrote The Return of William Lang. It covered other remarkable cures too, including cataracts, glaucoma, arthritis, kidney disorders, brain tumours, heart trouble, cancer, and other ailments. This is a photo of George the Healer as his fame spread. Several celebrities consulted the Chapman and Lang partnership, and from the books about George it's clear that he got quite a kick out of meeting such people. They included Lawrence Harvey, the well-known cinema actor, comic actor Stanley Holloway, and also the prolific author Barbara Cartland, as well as the famous writer of children's books, Roald Dahl. But was Dr. Lang really who he said he was? Take the case of Dr. Singer, suffering from cancer. When he walked into the consulting room, he was unaware that this Dr. Lang was the same one who had taught him many years ago previously. So Dr. Singer was greeted with, "Hello, my dear boy, I'm happy to see you again." And other old friends of Lang were convinced it was the same person they knew when he was alive. The most important witness was Dr. Lang's own daughter, Marie Linden Lang, a well-educated, level-headed woman. She made the following statement: "I can truthfully say that the William Lang who operates through the body of George Chapman is, without a doubt, my father." What convinced her were correct replies with information from William Lang that George could not possibly have known. In fact, Marie Linden Lang and some of her father's former medical colleagues signed a contract with George that lasted 4 decades, so that they could meet regularly for discussions with William Lang, and which allowed them also to bring their own intractable cases to him. And acknowledging George's link with her father, his daughter gave many of William Lang's old belongings to George, including his bed, his examination couch, and his desk. And on her death, she left much of her estate to him. Early on in their partnership, George learnt that Dr. Lang's son Basil became a surgeon like his father, but he died of pneumonia in 1928. And Dr. Lang foretold that George would also have a son who would become a healer and work with Basil just as Dr. Lang was working through George. Although Michael Chapman does not go into trance like his father did, and nor does he undertake those spirit operations. One of George's most important cases involved Bernard Hutton, a skeptical journalist who wrote this book, which became a bestseller, Healing Hands. Bernard had been assured by his own doctors that he was going blind from non-paralytic poliomyelitis. So his wife persuaded him to attend Lang's clinic, just as a last resort. Bernard Hutton noted that Dr. Lang did not open his eyes, yet he was still able to perceive, for example, that the lenses in his glasses were -18, and that Bernard had had a splint operation on both eyes when he was a child. Then, still with closed eyes, Lang said, "The virus that brought about your illness, which your doctor thought was a non-paralytic type of poliomyelitis, has gone. But you do have a serious hepatitis virus upsetting your liver." In the book he wrote later, Bernard said, "If I'd been amazed before, I was speechless now. I had not told Chapman anything about my own doctor, nor had I mentioned being ill. It was uncanny." Lang told Bernard that he would operate on his eyes. "You may hear me talking, calling out names and asking for instruments," he said. "But don't be alarmed. I shall be assisted in this operation by my son Basil and various other colleagues. You won't be able to see them because they too have passed into spirit, but you won't feel any pain." With the operation underway, Dr. Lang clicked his fingers just above Bernard's open eyes, while Lang's own eyes remained shut. As he later wrote in his book, "Incredible as it may seem, I experienced the physical sensation of incisions being made, painless but nonetheless capable of being felt. The man's eyes never opened, and he did not touch me. Yet a little later, I felt as though he was stitching up the wounds. Lang also operated on his liver to dispose of that hepatitis virus. When it was all over, Bernard sat up feeling dazed and distressed. But worst of all, he couldn't see at all. Only barely could he distinguish between light and dark, and he feared that this may not be temporary. Back in the car, awaiting his wife's return to drive him home, Bernard regretted ever having got into this. He felt dizzy, his body shaking. Then, after 10 minutes, he says, "I was gazing blindly in front of me, when very slowly the shape of a tree started to materialize. I thought it was my imagination, but it sharpened and came into focus. First I could distinguish the large branches, then the smaller ones, and finally the winter naked twigs. I closed my eyes in disbelief, and when I opened them again, I noticed that the windscreen was dirty and needed wiping." He exclaimed in joy and amazement, "The windscreen was dirty and I could see it." Healing Hands publicised George's healing far and wide. With the patient's permission, Bernard collected many case histories and told their stories. The book went into several editions and translations. In due course, George's work was published elsewhere too, with George as a co-author with Roy Zeman. In Surgeon from Another World, numerous doctors vouched for the efficacy of George and Lang's healing. Yet Dr. Lang always insisted that more important than the healing itself was providing proof of survival after death, because it gave people a new understanding, he said, and a new hope. It was because of the success of this partnership between a spirit doctor and his medium that I found myself reading George's obituary just 3 days after he might finally, and indeed for the first time, have shaken the hand with that doctor he'd worked with for almost 60 years. If you're thinking of pursuing this subject by reading a book, I recommend Surgeon from Another World. It's the most comprehensive, and it's a good read. Thank you for listening.